welcome to the latest episode of the Northern Spin podcast. Northern Spin is the political podcast that gives a voice to the North. And my name is Chris Maguire, Executive Editor of BusinessCloud, and I'm joined as always by Frank McKenna, Chief Executive and Group Chairman of Downtown in Business. Welcome, Frank.
Good to see you again, Chris.
Yeah, it's been a busy day. But thank you to our sponsor, Sancus Lending UK, who are a Manchester headquartered real estate lender led by Managing Director Andrew Charnley. Sancus specialise in providing short form solutions to property entrepreneurs and developers throughout the UK. Sancus, a name you can count on. So thank you to them. We're recording this episode at just after 3 o'clock on Monday, hours after Keir Starmer has announced his resignation as Prime Minister, while Andy Burnham has announced his intention to run to replace him and become the UK's 7th Prime Minister in 10 years. He's been sworn in as MP. I use the word race loosely because West Streeting has already thrown his weight behind Burnham. There's a lot to digest, but the Northern Spin is the political podcast that gives a voice to the North. So we want to provide our unique Northern insight on national politics. Before we talk about Makerfield, reform and what a Burnham Cabinet might look like, it's only fitting we start by talking about Keir Starmer. This is the moment when Starmer stood at the lectern outside 10 Downing Street this morning and fell on his sword.
The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer of my parliamentary party to that question, and I accept that answer with good grace. Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party. I have spoken to His Majesty the King this morning to inform him of my decision.
Now, from a human level, Frank, it was hard not to be moved by the bit where he referred to his wife and his children, but I didn't sense any hint of contrition there at all. How do you think history will remember Keir Starmer?
I think history may be kinder to him than the current political commentary in terms of the way he's governed the country. But what people have been focused on who wanted to be kind to Keir Starmer today, and this always happens when a Prime Minister or high-profile person resigns from a post, is his time as leader of the Labour Party, which of course is 6 years now. And he did take over an organisation that was battered, bruised, and looked as though it was going to be in opposition for a considerable period of time. He did change the way in which the party was viewed. It made it credible again, got rid of an awful lot of the toxicity around Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbynistas. He was aided and abetted, I'd suggest, by an absolutely dreadful Conservative government, which culminated in Liz Truss's 44 days or whatever it was in office. And then, of course, Rishi Sunak was trying to do his best to turn that tank around, but was never going to happen. So I think the victory is somewhat to do with the Tories' failure, but nevertheless, he does need to be given credit for taking what, as I say, was a battered and bruised Labour Party brand and turning that round. Unfortunately, I think the step from leader of the opposition to Prime Minister was a step too far, out of his depth, no political instinct, and I think in the end, that is why he's paid the ultimate price.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything you've said there, actually. I think he's a bit like a interim football manager. He was all right as a safe set of hands, but, the step up to the big job was much too much for him. And, like you said before, he did inherit a Labour Party, which was a state of, some confusion when he entered the fray. But he never had any policies when he became Prime Minister. And I think his tenure will be remembered for a series of screeching and embarrassing U-turns, namely on welfare reforms and winter fuel payments. As a business journalist, I think what he did in terms of national insurance and voicing that onto the business community was an absolute disaster. And I don't think he ever really recovered from that. And then the Peter Mandelson affair would never go away. And his decision to rubber stamp his appointment as US ambassador was a disaster all round. That was a final nail in his coffin, I think. So, I think history will remember him more kindly than it does today, but I don't think it will remember him as a great Prime Minister. We're going to inevitably talk more about Starmer later in this episode, but I think we need to provide a bit of a recap on this momentous week, as opposed to just this momentous day, before we talk about what now for Andy Burnham. So big thank you as well to our listeners. We've received some lovely comments from as far afield as the US, Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, and across Europe. Basically, all the countries that I visited recently. No, I'm only joking. Special mention for David Higginson, who's the Chief Content Officer at the publishing giant Reach, who described Northern Spin as a belting listen. So thank you very much to him. Now, Northern Spin came out of retirement in the lead up to the Makerfield by-election because I think both the two of us felt we had to do something. And this is the moment we knew that the Northern Spin podcast was coming home for good. This is when the acting returning officer and chief executive of Wigan Council, Alison Mackenzie Folan OBE, confirmed a certain Andrew Burnham as the winner of the Makerfield by-election, and Northern Spin was coming home.
And I do hereby declare that Andy Burnham is duly elected. Thank you.
Now, a lot of people thought the Makerfield by-election was going to go to the wire. You didn't. I was trying to find the clip from the last episode where you said you thought it'd be a comfortable victory. It turned out to be that 9,000 votes. So we won't, we're not going to go back through everything that happened at the Makerfield by-election. But why do you think he won so convincingly? And what does it say about Andy Burnham as a PM?
I think Andy Burnham was able to reach into the parts of the electorate that very few politicians can, in that he attracts votes from left and right. So we know now, looking at the analysis of the poll in Makerfield last Thursday, that he was able to get Tories vote for him, Lib Dems and Greens.
He got both the Tories to vote for him, did he?
There were a few hundred, weren't there? And then, of course, there were people who were probably toying with the idea of voting Reform. Let's not forget, 6 weeks ago, Reform won 14 out of the 15 seats, I think it was, in the Wigan Council elections, which, of course, Makerfield is part of. There was a 20-plus point swing to Burnham in this by-election since that particular contest in May. And the other thing to remember is, and this is what I think I may have said on the last podcast, there was a much bigger turnout in the by-election there was its general election. Again, very unusual. But I just felt that Andy Burnham, the personality, the character, would engender that sort of interest and a much bigger turnout of the Labour voters who had probably at the last general election sat at home, partly because they were not that enthusiastic about a Starmer government, but also because they probably thought, well, we're going to win this seat anyway. Such was the nature of the focus on this by-election and the threat of a Reform candidate, and therefore continued momentum for Nigel Farage in his steer towards 10 Downing Street, that I think an awful lot of Labour voters who'd sat on their hands 2 years ago decided to get out and vote. And certainly when I knocked on doors in Makerfield, which I did a couple of evenings during the campaign, the enthusiasm of the Labour voter was what surprised me. Not the fact that people were saying they were going to vote Labour, but the fact they were going to do it, as I say, with such enthusiasm and gusto. And I think that's what Andy Burnham has fed into that particular campaign, and now will be hoping to feed into the country. A bit of hope, a bit of optimism, and hopefully a bit of vision as well.
Yeah, I don't... see, Labour didn't win this by-election, Andy Burnham did. And it was conspicuous by its absence. There was no reference to Labour on all his advertising and all his posters as well. So he knew that. I think the second thing is, I think Burnham fought the campaign that he wanted to fight on his terms. I got a photographer friend who covered the Makerfield by-election for about 3 weeks, and I asked him what he thought of Andy Burnham. He said, look, he didn't denigrate opposition. He only spoke about what he would do, and he found that quite refreshing, and I thought an elector would find that positive as well. I think one of the things that Andy Burnham's done really well is he didn't make the mistake of thinking the only way to beat Reform is to move further to the right than Reform, which is what the Conservatives have done. And obviously, the election period coincided with the trial of the killer of 18-year-old Henry Novak. Now, what you saw there was a distinct approach, a difference in approach. So Nigel Farage, the following morning, despite a request from the family not to weaponise it, did an early morning press conference, spoke about a two-tier policing system, whereas Andy Burnham much more dignified in his response and said we need to be much more measured into how we respond to that as well. I think the third thing as to why Andy Burnham won, and we have to think about this, it's I think Reform had a dreadful campaign. I mean, a really dreadful campaign. And actually, maybe it's because I'm a nice guy, I actually felt a bit sorry for their candidate, Robert Kenyon, because I almost feel as though Reform didn't care who they put up. They just thought they'd put somebody up and they would win. And then when you looked at him on Question Time, BBC's Question Time, he was clearly out of his depth. Then when the the historic social media post came out, he was cooked and he couldn't defend it. I think what was really interesting is Reform's approach is straight out the Donald Trump handbook, which is, we'll double down on it. We won't apologise for it. He's just a working class lad from the north. And working class lads from the north said that's not what we say as well. So I thought it sort of compounded. It wasn't, the original offence was bad, but the way
they made it worse.
They made it worse. They made it worse. And then what you had is you had, and I think a lot of the undecided then went over to Burnham as well. So I think Burnham fought the campaign that he wanted, and it was an excellent campaign, really well organised. I think Reform had a disastrous campaign as well. And I just want to share this with you. I don't know, as a big football fan, I'm sure you saw this as well. But what you saw is the way Reform operate, they seize on a controversy and then they pour fire onto it. And sometimes they can't see a controversy, so they create one. Now, I'm going to play a short clip from Sarah Poachin, Reform's MP for Runcorn and Helsby, talking about domestic violence.
England won the football last night, and thank goodness they did, because on the occasions that England lose their football matches, the incidences of domestic violence go through the roof. So, boys, keep winning.
Now, Frank, you're a man of the people. I don't know if you heard her subsequent car crash interview on Sky TV at the Makerfield count, but it was embarrassing. Reform have been dubbed the Tory retreads because of the wave of washed-out Tory defectors like Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and Nadeem Zahawi who joined the party. After Starmer's resignation speech, Nigel Farage has come out today, Monday, to Substack, which seems to be the way that politicians announce their thoughts, described Starmer as the most incompetent Prime Minister this country's ever had the misfortune of having, demanded a snap election. What do you think the Makerfield result means for Reform? And do you think, as Starmer thinks, that we've hit peak Reform?
I think that there was certainly indication even before the by-election that some of the shine was coming off Nigel Farage. And it's inevitable that we talk about Nigel Farage over and above Reform because it is a bit of a one-man band. Farage is obviously the guy that has attracted support, and Farage is the guy that people talk about when they say they're going to support a right-wing populist. They don't talk about Robert Jenrick. They don't talk about Richard Tice. They talk about very much so the personality of Farage. And I think a couple of things in the run to the election happened, Makerfield election that is. One was this £5 million controversy of a donation from
Christopher Harbour, the crypto billionaire.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's certainly damaged Farage, not just in terms of the electorate's view of him, but I think his personal confidence has taken a knock. He's not being quite as brash. He's not been out there as much. And I think that's really hurt the Reform vote. But I think also, and this was almost inevitable, you've since becoming the main challenger party to the government, people from the media in particular, but also electors are saying, OK, let's lift the curtain a bit. It can't all be about Nigel. Who's behind him? And the point that you make, Chris, this recycled old Tory party of Jenrick, of Braverman, those are the people now that the electors are looking at saying, well, hang on. They were the people who got us into the mess in the first place. Why is Nigel Farage promoting them to potentially be the next members of a new government? And I think that has damaged them as well. A final thing I'll say, and I've thought this for a while anyway, I'm not convinced that Nigel Farage has ever truly wanted to be Prime Minister. He's great at throwing brickbats. He's great at identifying all of the problems or so-called problems that this country faces. I'm not as convinced that he knows the solutions or that he's even bothered about finding what those solutions are, unless the very simplistic slogans like take back control, stop the boats. But does he really want to come under the sort of scrutiny that the likes of Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, even Boris Johnson come under when you're living in that spotlight in 10 Downing Street?
Yeah, I look at Reform and they are they're the party of the disruptor party. And like in the world of tech, if you're a disruptor, you're the new kid on the block. They've lost that sheen. They're no longer the new kid on the block. You've got Restore, who are splitting their vote, and they don't like it. And actually, I thought Farage came across as a boy whose football's being popped when he said, we don't need a party to the right of us, when actually that's what they are. So, and I think he comes across as a graceless loser. I mean, he literally barely been heard of since Makerfield until Starmer's resigned. He pitched his head above the parapet. I think you're right, actually. I think if you did a straw poll of people and said, right, beyond Nigel Farage, name 2 politicians in the Reform Party, I'm not sure you could. And I think that's a problem. But I also think that they've lost 3 by-elections on the trot, of which they thought they could win. And I think we'll talk about the Greater Manchester mayoral by-election fairly soon as well. I think that's going to be a big, big result.
There's definitely evidence to suggest that people are going out voting anyone but Reform in these by-elections, and that's inevitably going to hurt him. But I think if you compare and contrast what I was saying earlier about Corbyn's Labour Party, it almost became a social movement rather than a political party. I think Farage is great at leading social movements and campaigns, not so good at managing political parties. Why? It's one of the reasons why he's been leader of so many of them.
I also think, though, that there's a real danger of dismissing Reform because, like Robert Kenyon, I think we can agree, was not a great candidate. And yet he got 35% of the vote. Like 15,000 people were willing to vote for him over a guy who'd been the mayor of Manchester for 10 years. So, yeah, it was a thumping win, but it wasn't as thumping as I would have wanted it to be. And when I watched Robert Kenyon on Question Time, you think, if anybody votes for this guy, it's a vote too many. But it is what it is. Now, a lot of people, Frank, think that it was the Northern Spin podcast that won it for Andy Burnham. I probably think we were just a small part in the machine. What I thought was fascinating is the A-team that Andy Burnham put around him to win the Makerfield election, because I think it tells you something about him as a person, and it also gives you a little bit of a inkling as to the sort of makeup of what a cabinet would look like should he, as we all expect, become the next Prime Minister. So we look at his A-team. Louise Haigh, Sheffield Heeley MP. She managed Andy Burnham's campaign with her dog Milo. Is being tipped for a senior cabinet job. After Friday's result, she posted a photo of her with Burnham on Instagram with the message "Hope won" in Makerfield. So I think if we were talking on manoeuvres, she would clearly be on manoeuvres, but she really believes in Andy Burnham, and Andy Burnham has a reputation for rewarding loyalty. Annalise Midgley, who you will know, Knowsley MP, worked as political lead on Burnham's campaign, former trade union official. I'll be honest, I didn't know this next MP, the MP for Peckham, Miatar Fabule.
Yeah, very, very talented woman.
Rated very highly.
Yeah, very talented woman.
Made a number of visits to Makerfield as well. Josh Simons clearly vacated his seat in Makerfield to create the opening for Burnham to win. Kate Green, Burnham's Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, former MP, tipped to become by some as Burnham's Chief of Staff. Kevin Lee, you can't mention Kevin Lee. He's like the ant to Andy Burnham's deck. Long-term advisor.
He'll be delighted.
Well, I hope so. Most recent role was obviously Director of the Mayor's Office for Andy Burnham. And Lucy Powell, MP for Manchester, always been a big long-term supporter of Andy Burnham as well. I mean, they are some of the A-team.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that say about Andy Burnham, that team? And of those people that we've mentioned, what's your view on what might happen next?
Well, I think you've said it, Chris. He basically rewards loyalty, likes people around him who have been big Andy Burnham supporters for a considerable amount of time. He knows most of those people through his political career before he was mayor and after, particularly people like Lucy Powell, for example. And so it would not be of any surprise to see some of those names emerge as leading contenders for significant roles in the cabinet. But when we last spoke, Chris, prior to the by-election, I said that one of the first things he needs to shed is this idea that he's king of the North. And that means to me that he's got to be really careful about who he hands those badges out to as far as ministerial positions are concerned. He needs to get the balance right. Not simply the balance of geographical and location across the UK, but also the balance between left, right and centre of the Labour Party. I think what Keir Starmer did, and Louise Haig's a prime example of this, is he cut out a significant chunk of what would loosely be described as soft left voices when he did his reshuffle. He sacked Louise Haig relatively early in the Parliament for a misdemeanour that was known about and was undertaken 20 odd years ago. So that never made any sense to me, and I felt at the time that it was a strange decision, and it's proved to be quite ironic that she was the person that has manoeuvred and basically played a pivotal role in Andy Burnham going back to Westminster and taking Keir's job off him. But when it comes to that question of who does Andy Burnham appoint to those key cabinet positions, he can't afford to simply provide us with a mini Manchester cabinet. It's got to be much broader than that. As I say, he's got to shed that King of the North reputation that he's had and he's worked on for a long time. And I think that although some of those people will be given key positions, other of them are going to have to be a bit more patient whilst he starts to develop his team, his thoughts, his ideas, and brings new thinking into his own team.
I think with Andy Burnham is that he wants to be authentic. He talks about doing politics differently. So, is he going to turn up if, as expected, he becomes the next Prime Minister, in a T-shirt? No, he's not. and he is. He's going to have to stay true to his roots, but he is going to have to put some blue sky, some distance between him and the King of the North, because you're already seeing it on social media being played out as well. And it won't be long as well, especially with the right-wing press being as they are, that if that cabinet is dominated by people from the North, especially Greater Manchester, it'll look like an old boys club. I think he'll have quite a lot of women in that cabinet. I really do. And I think he'll want to make it look as different to Keir Starmer's cabinet as he can. I don't think there'll be much room for any, Starmer loyalists in that cabinet. But yeah, I think, I don't think he'll change his voice. I don't think he'll change his accent. I don't think he'll do any of that, because I think that's what's got him where he's got to. But yeah, I think there'll definitely be a softening of the edges, probably. That's all for part one of the Northern Spin podcast. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a second. Welcome back to the Northern Spin podcast, part two. We're recording this on Monday, and it's fair to say it's been a whirlwind day. Quick recap. Keir Starmer resigned as Prime Minister. Watch that unfold on the news. Andy Burnham's announced his intention to stand in a leadership race to replace him. It sounds like a Sky Sports ad for Super Sunday. However, his most obvious rival, West Streeting, has thrown his weight behind Burnham. So will there be a race at all? Probably not. Andy Burnham's been sworn in as an MP, but Reform leader Nigel Farage has finally popped up his head and, surprise, surprise, called for a snap election. And the day isn't finished yet. Frank, I've got some quick questions to ask you. Is there any way at all Andy Burnham, and you're putting your reputation on the line here, will not be the next Prime Minister?
No. Andy Burnham will definitely be the next Prime Minister, and a much smoother route than I anticipated, because I didn't think there would be as easy a path. I didn't think Starmer would stand down as quickly as he has done. I did think that West Streeting and maybe one or two others would throw their hat in the ring to create a leadership contest as well. Indeed, some suspected that Keir Starmer would fight that contest. What changed the game, though, was the significance of Andy Burnham's majority. Had he squeaked in 2,000 or 3,000, then I think people like West Streeting, people like Keir Starmer and others would have been saying, OK, Greater Manchester Mayor, he's won on his own turf, but he's only just won, and it's a reduced majority from the general election. What he actually managed to do was make our majority there even bigger than it was at the general election and get over 50% of the vote in a seat that people thought was going to be tight. And I think realistically, even MPs who were sceptical about a coronation for Andy Burnham as he comes back to Westminster have looked at that result and thought, do you know what, we just need to get on with this change now and give Andy Burnham as much time as we possibly can to create that change, that difference of attitude towards the Labour Party that we need. And that means, I think, Andy Burnham could even be in before the 3 weeks, which has been suggested today, as Labour decide whether they're going to have a contest or not. Wes Streeting was the obvious alternative candidate. The fact that he's thrown his weight behind Andy now suggests to me that there won't be a contest, and therefore the National Executive of the Labour Party might move a bit sooner to install him in number 10.
I'm a big football fan, as are you. And like any deluded England football fan, I'm looking at my wall chart and thinking, if we finish top of the group, we'll play this team in the last 32 and then the last 16. And if they don't go through, we'll play them in the last 8 and we'll play them in the final. I did my Andy Burnham race to number 10 wall chart. And basically, win Makerfield, straight to number 10. Like, ignore the quarterfinals, semi-finals. That's the way it feels to me. And because all the potential threats, Keir Starmer, Wes Streeting, all of them have just fallen by the wayside because of the scale of his win. Now, I'm not sure that's what Andy Burnham wants completely. I'm not, because a lot of people say, who is Andy Burnham? And I think it's a fair question. I think the one thing Andy Burnham wouldn't want is a really divisive leadership campaign. No. He wouldn't. Because what he's trying to do at the moment is bring the Labour Party together, because not everyone is a fan of Andy Burnham's. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what he stands for as well. So we're all in agreement Andy Burnham's going to be the next PM. The question now is the process that happens. And I'm very mindful that as we record this podcast on Monday, it's changing very quickly. Unless there's a dark horse in this World Cup that comes out of the long grass, I can't see any threat to him at all. We mentioned timings. I mean, one suggestion is the 17th of July, I think, is one date that's been put forward. What do you think Andy Burnham would want? He wouldn't want to be Prime Minister tomorrow, would he?
I think he'd said through some of his advisors that September would be the optimum time for him to become Prime Minister. That gave him an opportunity to go into Westminster, get his feet under the table once again, get to meet some of the MPs who he doesn't know. You know, we assume everybody knows Andy Burnham. Of course, lots of MPs never even met the guy. So he would have wanted to do that, get a bit of plan of action together, hopefully a really bold first 100 days, because that was one of the downfalls of the government thus far, not being able to hit the ground running. And then, of course, get that team around and get his cabinet in place and so on and so forth. But I think fair to say, and one of Starmer's team mentioned this over the weekend, if you are organising a coup, then it is incumbent upon you as to when that coup is successful, you're ready to go. Well, the coup has been successful. Yeah. And so he's just got to get on with it. And politics seldom gives you the time scale that you want. You've just got to take those opportunities as and when they come along and take them as effectively as you can. So what he's got to be doing today is, instead of glad-handing all those MPs, hoping to win some support amongst those that don't know him and perhaps a bit sceptical about him, he can dispense with that now. He's the only realistic candidate in the race. So what he needs to focus on is building that team of advisors, making sure he gets the geographical and political spread of that cabinet right. But most importantly, and we as political commentators often forget this, the personalities are one thing, and they are important, but it's the policies that matter most. And if he's unable to hit the ground running with some significant change of mood, of policy, and just in terms of the hope and optimism that the country needs right now, then those calls for the general election are going to get louder and louder and louder. So his time now and the time of his team needs to be spent on working on those very, very important plans as to what his first 100 days in office look like.
Yeah, because he could have the shortest honeymoon in the history of politics.
He's not going to get one.
No, he's not. I mean, you're going to talk about literally 6 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
But equally, if his first 6 minutes are good and he fills the country with optimism, and the best thing that could happen for an Andy Burnham premiership would be for England to win the World Cup. It sounds ridiculous, but it would give that optimism and that feel-good factor, which at the moment, under a Starmer government, we've just not got. One of the things about Starmer, and I think if we were offering advice to Andy Burnham, one piece of advice would be to do the opposite of what Keir Starmer did. Because he was seen as being quite aloof. He was seen as being very distant from the backbench MPs as well. I don't think Burnham will do that. I think I wouldn't be surprised if gets a little 5-minute conversation with pretty much half of his half the Labour MPs. However, if he focuses too much on that, he'll lose sight of the fact he's got to win the hearts and minds of a non-Labour supporting government, non-Labour supporting country at the moment as well. So he has got to set the ground running. I think he would have loved to have announced a ban on social media for under-16s, but obviously Keir Starmer stole a march on that last week by announcing it. We'd spoken about it in a previous episode. You talk about the first 100 days, and I thought about this as well. If you were the chief exec of a company, you have 100 days to really, put your marker down. I think he's got less than 100 days. I think it's measured in probably, tens of days, just in terms of starting off well. So I'd be very interested to see what he does at the very beginning. When we did a podcast before Makerfield, you said that you'd love to see a daily bulletin. Whereby Andy Burnham, or at least somebody within his cabinet, but Andy Burnham a lot is very visual. There's not a lot you would praise Donald Trump for, but what Donald Trump does is he really grabs that news agenda and sets the tone. And I think the tone is going to be the key word for an Andy Burnham government as well. So in terms of the policies that he announces, it's almost, the policies are almost as not as important as the way that he says it. Because the thing is that Keir Starmer can say something and he sucks the life out of it. Yeah. So nobody is interested in it. Yeah. I mean, that social media ban, he had a situation the previous week where he had all these parents holding pictures of their loved ones who died as a result of their experience on social media. That was the backdrop for that announcement, as opposed to him standing at a lectern, delivering a monotone announcement. I don't think Andy Burnham will do that. I think he recognises the value in the optics as well. And I don't say that I absolutely wholeheartedly support this ban on social media for under-16s. I really, really, really do. What do you think Andy Burnham's priority should be if and when he becomes the Prime Minister in terms of his inbox? If you're advising him and you're paying he's paying you a huge consultancy fee, what would you tell him?
And it is when he becomes Prime Minister. I think we can drop the if. My personal view is that being a politician is no bad thing. I think Keir Starmer not being a politician shows you what can go wrong when there's somebody in 10 Downing Street who just doesn't like the job he's in, doesn't like politics. Andy Burnham loves politics. He may be in the insurgent. He may say, I don't like Westminster politics and the Westminster bubble. And there will be an element of truth to that. But he loves politics, and he's great at identifying the headlines, the stories, and what's going to set the news agenda. And that's what Andy Burnham is good at and what he needs to continue to do as PM. In terms of what he does in his first few days, and as you say, Chris, he's not going to get 100, but the 100-day mark is always important. Those personalities that he does appoint around his cabinet table are going to be important because, as I say, I think he needs to send a signal to say, I am now a politician for the country, not simply for the north of England. I'll take the lessons that we learned from Manchester into national government and try and translate some of those policies to make the same sort of strides that we've seen in Greater Manchester for the United Kingdom. Nevertheless, I'm broader in my appeal, and one of the ways in which he does that is appoint a cabinet that is far more of all the talents and includes people from London, the Midlands and elsewhere. So I think that's an important first task for him. Secondly, narrative, and as you say, tone. Hugely important that he gets on the front foot. He's optimistic. Okay, he's inheriting some problems, but he's got to come to that lectern, day one, hour one, saying these are the things that I think we need to do as a country to turn things around. And guess what? The UK is a fantastic place. We've got great entrepreneurs, we've got great businesses, we've got great people in our workforce, and we're going to present you with a set of policies and tools that can really start us to motor. He's got to come away from that, as you rightly said, Chris, the sucking out of oxygen of almost anything that's been positive in this country. And that's what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, to an extent, have managed to do. So, yeah, recognise the challenges, but go big on the optimistic solutions. And in terms of the policies and the tough decisions that need to be faced, and where I think he will get support, I think he's got to look at that defence improvement programme quickly. Yeah. He's got to invest in defence and security, but I think he can have early conversations with our European counterparts and see if some of that burden can be shared. He needs to get back into that conversation about welfare reform, talk to Pat McFadden, talk to Alan Milburn about the report he recently done on young people who are out of education, employment and training, and say, okay, let's sell welfare reform, not on the basis of shaving a few bob off the bill, but using that money to actually help, assist and support people who need to get back into work. That's the way you sell that policy to Labour MPs and to the country. And I think finally, be very comfortable with this, but the government, to be fair to them, were already on the way to securing these changes. Let's roll devolution out. Nobody knows better than Andy Burnham the difference that genuine devolution can bring. So those fiscal responsibilities that are going to go to Manchester and the West Midlands, don't be surprised if he says to his mate in Liverpool, Steve, do you want a bit of the action as well? And I think if I was sat in Lancashire, for example, where they're still arguing about local government review and reorganisation, I'd be getting a march on and saying, we need to get with this devolution programme because this fella sat in number 10 is going to be going big on that.
You mentioned Steve in Liverpool. Steve Rotherham is a very good friend of Andy Burnham's. I think a couple of things there.
I keep joking and saying Lord Rotherham of Kirby, but he's not thanking me for that.
Okay. Well, it's a matter of time, one would think. I think, once again, I think in terms of what Burnham needs to say, just go back to what Keir Starmer said when he took over, which was the country's in a mess. The Conservatives have left us with no money. We're going to have to make some really hard decisions. It's not going to be easy. We're going to have to tighten our belts, and I'm going to spend $2,000 on a pair of glasses. Right, terrible. Terrible optics again. I don't mean, pardon the pun. Yeah. So I think Andy Burnham standing at the lectern and actually maybe using some humour, which if you were to do a highlight reel of Keir Starmer's jokes of 2 years, you wouldn't have
pretty short.
It'd be pretty short, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It'd be pretty short. Where I think, Andy Burnham, I think he can disarm people with his personality. Yeah. So I would love to see that. I think there's a couple of things that he will do, and we touched on this in an earlier episode, is that if you look at what Andy Burnham's perceived as weaknesses are, one would be, what does he know about the economy in terms of a lot of concern about will Andy Burnham spook the markets? Everyone talks about the markets. So I think he'll say something to put the markets, to give confidence to the markets. I think that's something he'll do as well. I think devolution's a big win. I mean, he said that he's largely going to stick to the manifesto as well. Be interesting if he sticks to it completely, because I think we can't think of it as a 3-year window, but effectively he's got a maximum of a 3-year window to turn around the Labour Party with a view to making them electable at the next general election. If he has a 3-year window, then he really has a 6-month gap now where he can try and make those tough decisions. I do think what you say about defence, I do think that is something he'll do. I really do, because I think he'll get cross-party support for that as well. Yeah. But in terms of the cabinet, that's going to be the first choice. Who's going to be on that cabinet, which is why I think he would probably like a little period, say the middle of July, because if he went, as was thought at one time, that they would announce him before the party conference season, that would be 3 months. And I think the momentum that he's built up in the last week and a half would dissipate. So I don't think that was practical. And I think that as soon as you get Starmer out of number 10, the better from the point of view as fresh start. Yeah. So let's say it's the middle of July, and it could be earlier. His cabinet's key. Now, all eyes are on the Chancellor's role, because I think Keir Starmer was associated with Rachel Reeves and that style of fiscal control. Who's going to be the Chancellor is the question. Some people have said Ed Miliband, but the general view is that if Ed Miliband became Chancellor, there'd be 100 MPs would already riot. So the chances of him becoming Chancellor, I would say, are probably about... And
the trade unions have come out against it, which is remarkable, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so you'd say the chances of him becoming Prime Minister are pretty small. The chance of Ed Miliband becoming the Chancellor are probably, as remote as Scotland winning a World Cup. Yeah. But who do you think is going to be the Chancellor? I know it's, fantasy politics, but anybody but Ed Miliband?
It's so difficult, but I think he will want to indicate that he wants a balanced government, and so he'll want to suggest to the party, both within and without outside of Parliament, that he's not looking to be too radical on the economy. It was interesting that the only time I saw Andy embarrassed during that campaign was when he was asked by Victoria Derbyshire about fiscal rules. Because as you rightly say, Chris, economics just isn't his thing. So I think he wants somebody that he can trust. Is Wes Streeting too close to the crown if he becomes Chancellor? Possibly. My personal choice would be Wes Streeting. We'll well understand the politics as to why that might not happen. The other point, of course, is he'll be sacking a female high-profile politician in Rachel Reeves. Maybe he'll want another woman in that post, and therefore you can't rule out somebody like Yvette Cooper, who's been in the Treasury before, very experienced, decent enough in terms of a performer as far as the media is concerned, and I think gets on relatively well with Andy, knows him well, of course. So don't rule out Yvette Cooper. Wes Streeting potentially. Left field, we spoke about it very briefly before, somebody like Miata Fambula, very new sort of face, and would be a surprise, and as I say, very left field, but a very talented woman, somebody that's close to Andy, and so again, someone I don't think you could potentially rule out, but I don't think it will be Ed Miliband for all the reasons that you've said.
A couple of the names, Shabana Mahmood, almost to be nailed on to be Home Secretary.
I think she wants to stick with that job that she started so well.
And I think people are quite happy with the job that she's done. In terms of Wes Streeting, he's thrown his weight behind Andy Burnham, so people have put two and two together and said they've done a deal. He denies it, but be very surprised if he doesn't get a job back in Cabinet. And mentioned before, some of the people who helped him win Makerfield, I think Louise Haigh is almost certain to come back in. Lucy Powell, be very surprised if she doesn't get a spot as well. Which MPs do you think should keep their mobile phones on in case they get a WhatsApp off Andy Burnham? I mean,
in terms of sacking them or into
I'll tell you.
Well, here's another interesting thing, isn't it? In terms of the difference, I think you'll see between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer. Andy Burnham wouldn't WhatsApp you if he was sacking you. Right? He'd at very least phone you up, and more likely ask you to go in and have a cup of coffee or have a pint with him. And I think Keir Starmer demonstrated his lack of politics again in some of the dismissals he made. You know, people said we didn't even get a text message off Keir Starmer. We got a phone call from one of the staff. So there'll be a change as far as that's concerned. Who will be leaving the phone on? I wonder whether Johnny Reynolds may be moved out of that whips role, which I don't think he's particularly enjoying, and maybe back to business, where again I think he was doing a perfectly good job. Angela Rayner, I think, will be back in the Cabinet in some way, shape or form. But we are starting to talk again about Manchester voices, Manchester MPs. So where does he look beyond those people? Now, I don't know who's been talent spotting for him, but I'm sure people in there have been. And there will, I think, be some fresh faces that we've potentially not heard of. And it's been interesting to see some of those female backbench MPs and voices over the past few days come out and say that they're supporting Andy Burnham's candidacy. So conversations will have taken place with some of them as well. I don't think it's going to be a massive shake-up. I don't think he wants to be too radical and too bold with those cabinet changes at the top table, but I do think you'll see a slew of appointments at junior ministerial level with the view to promoting people as the Parliament progresses. The one final point I'll make, he's got currently in David Lammy, I think, a very ineffective Deputy Prime Minister. I wonder whether there's going to be a role for Lucy Powell, which enables her to continue to do what she's been doing so well in recent months as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, which is the campaigner, going out, meeting party members, meeting electors and voters, but also as Deputy Prime Minister without necessarily a portfolio, giving her a role around that cabinet table as well.
Lammy, like Starmer, is not a good communicator.
He's hopeless.
Doesn't come across well at all.
And he's one of those politicians that does come across, I'm afraid, as a little bit pompous, a little bit, I think, a little bit arrogant, and also very London-centric. So as much as I recognise that Andy can't go down there and say, right, it's all about Manchester, it's all about the North, you've also got to detach the government and the Labour Party from the thinking of some that it's a North London chatterati. We've got to get away from that and get some authenticity into that government. Streeting is a London MP, but he comes across as an authentic politician. Lammy, for me, absolutely doesn't.
As you know, I play cricket, right? I love cricket. And we've got a really good team at the moment. We've got a really good team spirit. I couldn't get a run for ages, but all the lads had my back. There was never any back chat. There was never any Chris Maguire out. There was never any drop him to the seconds. So when I finally did get a score of sorts, the lads were made up, and I got so many nice messages as well. Now, Andy Burnham as GM Mayor, you didn't read many people lobbying against him, did you? You didn't read or hear stories about leaks about Andy Burnham. You know, there were some big controversial stories that that Andy Burnham oversaw, but you didn't see that. And if I was the people around Andy Burnham, I'd be saying to the people who I want to line up in my cabinet, I'd say, look, first things first, no leaking. Yeah. I don't want any leaking. I said, because what we have to understand, I said, is nobody likes the Labour Party. And a lot of people think naively the reason they don't like the Labour Party is just because of Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is a very good stooge to carry the can. Yeah. But it's not just because of Keir Starmer. So I'd be saying, no leaking, we're streeting, your best mate, you know, because he does play the press quite well.
I love the way he's become my best mate.
He's your best mate. He's on you've got his mobile number on there, yeah. So yeah, I'd be saying
got a lot of other MPs as well.
but you mentioned like David Lammy. You know for a fact that if you said, look, David, time to go, straight away you've got somebody there who would probably, you know, or I'm not saying David Lammy would leak, but if you sack ministers, then straight away you create the potential for somebody to, you know, talk about you behind your back to the press. So I think that'd be really, really important to me.
He's got to shake it up enough to indicate the change and evidence that he does mean as though he's going to go in a different direction, but keep enough stability as to not spook the markets and to totally throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I think more importantly, and this is what people won't necessarily see, it's the team around number 10 that he has to get right. Yeah. The number of people that were in and out of 10 Downing Street and were phoning me up saying, this is an absolute shit show. Yeah. It's like chaotic. I think we're
38 minutes in before the first Frank McKenna swear word. Now, anybody who had that as a sweepstake, 38 minutes was the last guess.
And people were in and out of there like, I'll swear again, I'm afraid, blue arse flies. Yeah. So he needs to get his team at number 10 right. He needs to bring some competence, effectiveness to the number 10 operation. You know, Sue Gray was in there, didn't quite cut the mustard with a lot of the civil servants or indeed with Labour Party staffers. Morgan McSween, I always thought was ill-suited to a sort of civil servant role and went in as a party campaigner rather than somebody who was going to do the Prime Minister's bidding for him. But I think what Andy Burnham needs to do, alongside Kevin Lee and some of others very trusted lieutenants, is get a team of people in there who understand and appreciate how the Westminster system works. I know it's something Andy doesn't like, Westminster bubble and all that, but he will appreciate the fact that those procedures are in place, those processes are important. Who in his team is going to make sure they're reaching out to the Parliamentary Labour Party and the backbenchers? Who in his team are going to make sure that the policies Andy Burnham is prioritising are the policies that the civil servants are prioritising? Who in that team is going to make sure that the media are getting the stories that he wants coming out of the Westminster bubble rather than the stories that other backbench MPs want? And finally, let's get away from this backbiting and sniping and briefing against individuals and colleagues. And again, I don't think Andy Burnham will do that on a personal level, and it's certainly not something he'll want to see from any of his colleagues either.
Andy Burnham's clearly ambitious, and you know, politics is a horrible business. It's quite brutal at times. So the thing with Burnham knows he's going to have to make some tough decisions as well. But what I would say is that Burnham's not got a reputation for throwing people under the bus, whereas Keir Starmer, if things didn't go well, you know, there were sacrificial lambs. I don't think that's his modus operandi. But I think there'll be a matrix at 10 Downing Street, and I think they'll basically be saying, right, your job is to speak to all the backbench MPs and to keep them regularly informed. You know, because what we want is we want to keep this tier of the party happy. Because what you find is you listen to political podcasts, as I do, and people say, my phone's been red hot with MPs, you know, saying this, and this, and it is always nasty. It is always, you're not fit for the job, it's this, that, and the other, etc., etc., etc. And if Andy Burnham can get one thing right, you try and keep people happy. Like some people describe him as a pleaser. He wants to please people. But actually, what's wrong with trying to, keep people communicated so they feel part of the wider, the wider party? They feel it feels inclusive. But I would absolutely say if somebody's back, somebody's briefing the press against you, then very quickly I would say, listen, we don't want you. We don't want you. We want debate, but we don't want disloyalty. So that's something. I'm going to finish with, because it's linked to Andy Burnham. And incidentally, I know we've got the picture of Andy Burnham behind us. Future episodes of the Northern Spin podcast won't have Andy Burnham.
Big photograph of me.
A big photograph of you, yeah, absolutely. Excellent. A big, probably when you announced as his chief of staff. But I can't just say that would be a vote winner. Obviously, him becoming the Prime Minister has left a vacancy at Greater Manchester for a mayor. So I think the date's been set for the 30th of July. I was thinking that maybe he would want to be in a position where he could support the Labour candidate, and he still would, clearly, but he won't be able to do it as hands-on as he would otherwise do it. You look at some of the candidates that have entered the mix. I mean, Labour haven't as of yet announced their candidate, but it's almost certainly going to be Manchester Council's leader, Bev Craig. It's going to be a huge contest for reform because they're like a boxer that's on the ropes. Yes, they had a good local election win, but they've lost 3 high-profile by-elections. They can't afford to appoint the wrong candidate. I think right now, Reform are probably using some of the money, the millions from our crypto billionaire, to look at their candidate's social media history. Have
they appointed somebody?
Well, there's been some speculation as to who they're going to go. Restore are going to enter a candidate, but I think the deadline is coming up fairly soon as well. Yeah. The Greens have appointed Geraldine Coggins. She's a Trafford Council councillor. A lot of speculation that this is going to be a 2-horse race between Reform and the Labour Party. I mean, can you imagine? Burnham being the new Prime Minister, and the difference in him being able to announce that Labour have held on to the mayoralty, the seat in Manchester that he's vacated, and the difference between them losing it on the back of him, quitting. Right. I mean, it's too early to say which way it's going to go, but this becomes huge, isn't it?
It is a big job and a big city region, and arguably the most successful devolved area that we've seen. So whoever wins is going to be high profile on the basis that they're taking over from the highest profile mayor that we had in the UK. Bev Craig, who I think will be Labour's candidate, is going to be helped by 2 things, I think. One will be a Burnham bounce, because there will be a honeymoon period, and people will, I think, be feeling a little bit more spring in the step because of Andy Burnham's approach to being Prime Minister, and that, as we've spoken about, more optimistic tone he will set. Second thing, and this is where Keir Starmer has done Bev Craig a favour, the voting system has changed. So whereas it would have been first past the post in the local elections in May, for example, what we're moving back to is something called single transferable vote. So when you go into your polling booth, you will vote for your first favourite candidate, but then you have second, third, fourth and fifth preferences as well. My suspicion is that an awful lot of people who will go in and vote Green 1 will vote Bev Craig 2, and similarly, even people who vote Liberal Democrat or Conservative will see Bev Craig as a better alternative candidate than whoever the Reform or Restore alternatives are. So for me, I think Bev Craig has got a great opportunity of becoming the next mayor of Greater Manchester. But, as you say, Chris, it's going to be a 2-horse race. Reform are going to throw an awful lot of money at it. And what we do know is that a couple of days before the end of polling in the Makerfield by-election, they switched all the social media spend off. So they're obviously getting that money ready for a war chest for the Greater Manchester mayoralty. So it's going to be a tough fight for Bev.
Yeah, I think it'll be tough. I do, because she's not got the profile. I think she's been the leader since 2021. But she took over a successful council She's a very good speaker, and she's actually just been putting her head above the parapet in the sense that she's been out and about doing a lot of stuff. She's big on social media. I took part in a GM wellbeing run. Actually, I took part in the walk. She did the run. I'm not that fit, but so yeah, I think it is going to be interesting. But certainly, lots to talk about.
She is by far the brightest local government leader, certainly in the Northwest, arguably in the country. She's hugely talented, great in terms of the economics, knows local government well, obviously was Andy's advisor on the economy, regeneration and growth for Greater Manchester when he was mayor. She will be an exceptional mayor should she win on June the 30th.
Okay, watch this space. And as I say, you've got a track record of calling calling it early. There's no on manoeuvres this week on this episode of the Northern Spin, basically because everyone is on manoeuvres. So that's it for this episode of the Northern Spin podcast. If you've enjoyed it, tell your friends and family, give us a 5-star review. Thank you to our sponsors, Sancus Lending UK. We really do appreciate your support, the name you can trust. And finally, a massive thank you to you, Frank McKenna.
Cheers, Chris. Okay. And it's coming home.
It's coming home.